Hi, welcome to this Lent Bible study for 2024. This is a collaboration of New Hope and St. Luke's United Methodist Churches. We're looking at scriptures in the Old and New Testament each week during this Holy Lent. This is week 6. I'm Pastor Mike.
And I'm Pastor Michelle.
And each week we've been looking at different passages that lead us to understand how Lent can be a part of our everyday life, changing us for the better. Pastor Michelle's been looking at Old Testament passages. I've been looking at New Testament passages. Pastor Michelle, looking forward to this sixth and final
the last one
study. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to start my reflections today with Psalm 118, which is the psalm listed for Palm Sunday. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do encourage you to take some time to do so. This is an obvious psalm to use for Palm Sunday for a number of reasons. Scholars agree that it would have been used during a processional time, during communal worship, which fits with Jesus' procession into Jerusalem. More than that, though, not only are the themes of Psalm 118 echoed in the gospel writer's description of Jesus' triumphant entry into the city of Jerusalem at the beginning of Holy Week, but its verses are actually quoted there. So we're going to back up a second, though. Psalm 118 is actually the concluding psalm of a collection of psalms that begins with Psalm 113. And this collection came to be used during the Passover celebration, which you might remember was the reason Jesus was going into Jerusalem with his disciples. Throughout this collection of psalms, and in Psalm 118 in particular, we hear allusions to God's salvation of the people in the Exodus and to the deliverance of the people from exile in a way that clearly serves as a basis for hope that future deliverance would also occur. Psalm 118 begins, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his love endures forever." And if you're thinking that sounds kind of familiar, it should. It's the same line that we heard at the beginning of Psalm 107 just a couple weeks ago. It was good news for the people of God who were returning home after being exiled, who would have been the original audience for this psalm. It was good news for the followers of Jesus as they processed into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. And it is good news for us still today. For we too can turn to these verses and the rest of this psalm to find hope for whatever present struggles we are dealing with. For we know that God has been faithful in the past, he is steadfast in love, and his promise never fails. We've heard that phrase, steadfast love, over and over again this Lenten season, and I just love this reflection that I found in the New Interpreter's commentary. It says, steadfast love is a word that describes the very essence of God's character that is revealed in acts of deliverance, like those described and alluded to in Psalm 118. Isn't it amazing that the God of steadfast love wants you to know him and to be fully known by him, for you to be fully known by him? I want to lift up just one last thing from the psalm before moving briefly to the reading from the prophet Isaiah. If you've read through this psalm, you may have gotten stuck on a particular word. It says, "Open for me the gates of righteousness. I will enter and give thanks to the Lord." And this is the gate of the Lord through which the righteous may enter. If you're like me, you might not be feeling very righteous. So where does that leave us? We tend to be all too aware of our sins, both in the things we have done and the things that we have left undone. So it's good to know that in the context of the Psalms, to be righteous doesn't refer to those who are perfect or blameless. Instead, it refers to those who acknowledge that they owe their very lives and futures to God. Hopefully, that is something that you've been giving some thought to over this season of Lent. There's a ton more that we could explore in that psalm, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. So the Old Testament reading for today is from the Passion readings for the 6th Sunday of Lent, and it comes from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 50, verses 4 through the beginning of verse 9. The sovereign Lord has given me a well-instructed tongue to know the word that sustains the weary. He wakens me morning by morning, wakens my ear to listen like one being instructed. The sovereign Lord has opened my ears. I have not been rebellious. I have not turned away. I have offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. Because the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore, I have set my face like flint, and I know I will not be put to shame. He who vindicates me is near. Who then shall bring charges against me? Let us face each other. Who is my accuser? Let him confront me. It is the sovereign Lord who helps me. Who will condemn me? This passage has become known as one of the servant songs found in the prophet Isaiah, and in it we hear for the first time of the suffering of the servant. The connections with Holy Week are clear, and I'm sure Pastor Mike will have much more to share with us about that. But before we jump to the New Testament and the gospel readings, I want us to sit with this reading for just a minute. Reflecting on the passage from Isaiah, one scholar noted, the servant appears to understand his capacity to withstand assault as the embodiment of obedience. I was not rebellious. I did not turn backward, it says. He understood both his capacity to endure it and its purpose, because God had opened his ears and taught him. It's so easy to hear this passage in the voice of Jesus. And at least for me, it helps me begin to wrap my mind around how Jesus was able to endure what was to come and why, out of obedience to God. So as we prepare our hearts and minds to remember the events of the rest of Holy Week, let us draw near to the heart of the one who loves us so much. He willingly took on the consequence of our sin so that we could be saved through him.
Pastor Michelle, thank you. Terrifically impressive words you bring to our mind. Steadfast love, righteousness, endurance. And you talk about sacrifice in the midst of suffering. Yeah, powerful words. It leads us right into the gospel reading for this sixth study in this Holy Lent. John 12. In this gospel, we find in verses 12 through 16 an understanding of where Jesus is going and how he's leading us to follow him. Here are these words of life meant for you and me today. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt. His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and been done to him. These words are meant for us to understand both the way is Jesus approached the city during that Palm Sunday, that he was being celebrated, but at the same time he was not understood fully. In fact, it would take both a cross and a resurrected empty tomb for Jesus to be understood by his followers. It helps me to see that sometimes the promises God offers to us are promises we can't quite understand on our own. That sometimes where we're called to be, what we're called to do, the next steps we're called to take, are oftentimes very difficult, maybe even impossible to understand in the moment. So often, we see Jesus leading us in a direction. We celebrate who he is for us. We celebrate what we believe he's going to do for us. And then we follow him and discover that he's calling us to sacrifice in a way that's humbling and simple, rather than somehow celebrating who he is in a way that everyone will recognize and say, he really is the greatest. So often we have to be the embodiment of humility instead of being ones who draw great attention to ourselves. Jesus fulfills promises made by God to save all people through an eternal kingdom. His followers at the time, when John 12 was actually happening, his followers didn't understand that Jesus would be in some way or other a different kind of king for a much different kind of kingdom. They expected in this life, in this world, to experience a kind of fulfillment that radically changed the nations and the kings of all nations of the world. And that's what did happen, just not in the way any of them expected. See, Jesus was beginning to create for everyone a foundation and a framework for an eternal kingdom. And he was going to be the one who sat on that eternal throne. For us today, we're the next generation to begin to wrestle with these truths in this last week in Holy Lent, where Jesus calls us to a different way of life, a different kind of reward, a different kind of sacrifice. Again, the God who has steadfast love and in steadfast love offers to us a kind of eternal grace, calls us to imitate the one who gives himself up, whose face is like flint, as the Isaiah passage says, taking on both the punishment and the sin of the world in order for there to be a new way for you and me. Jesus fulfills promises made by God so that all people may become part of an eternal kingdom, citizens in a new way of life. You know, the crowd responds to Jesus' arrival. Their hope in God is something that in many ways helped them to believe something new is about to happen. That enthusiasm is meant to be part of our life today, expecting that for us, God has got something new just around the corner. The reality also is that new life is a relationship with God, brings us together with others, invites us to say, God, I'll do whatever you wish for me to do. I'll celebrate Jesus Christ. And I'll understand that the work I'm doing is really an eternal kingdom's work in this world, in this time, in this temporary kind of existence. So let me ask you, how can you welcome Jesus into your heart and mind, opening yourself up to Jesus' leadership, to this steadfast love that from the very beginning God has revealed to humanity and to creation? How can you be part of a kind of covenant relationship with God that's eternal in nature, that's part of a larger family of God, who are all part of this eternal kingdom? What's the next step for you? And then what new things is God doing in you? During that first Palm Sunday, the crowd recognized something new was happening. They didn't realize the extent of it. They didn't realize the next steps they would have to take. In fact, honestly, God's imagination was unimaginable to them in that first Palm Sunday. In the same way, it's very possible that there are new things God is leading you to be a part of that you believe are about to happen for you, but at the same time, you can't really imagine what that next step is. I'm praying for you that God will help you to take these next steps of faith. And I'm grateful that we can be a part of this Holy Lent this year in 2024. Thank you for joining us to be part of this Holy Lent, and I hope that you'll discover in these 6 Bible studies ways of life that lead you closer to God through the testimony of the Scriptures and the fellowship of other Christians. Pastor Michelle, thank you so much for being part of this collaboration. It's been wonderful.
It has been. I've enjoyed it.
I have too, and I've learned a lot. I really appreciate your discipline and dedication to really putting together terrific studies each week. Thank you so much.
And you as well.
I appreciate it very much. We also need to thank our tech guru, our producer, our tech team leader here at St. Luke's. Joe, thank you so much for being the one who makes sure that this is captured in a way that others can see as well. Again, thank you for being part of this Lent Bible study for 2024. God bless you.